Okay, Chair, we're live.
Thank you, Wyn, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee, where we'll be looking at a single item on the agenda, which is the report to go to Cabinet next week in respect of future plans for Llanfihangel-Rhydython CP School. I'm joined by portfolio holder Phil Davies, who I'll introduce in a minute, but before that I need to go through the formalities for the meeting. Wyn, could you run through the list of apologies that we have received?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from County Councillors Bryn Davis, Tim Van Rees, Councillor Kath Roberts-Jones, who's on other council business, from Lynette Lovell, Geraint Rees, and I understand also that Councillors Phil Davis, David Meredith and Michael Williams will have to leave this meeting shortly for another meeting, so other council business as well, Chair.
Thank you for that, Wyn. Could I add tentatively Councillor Lucy Roberts to the list? She notified me that she was going to be trying to access this meeting by telephone and she's not shown up yet. And also Councillor David Jones, who's just notified me by email that he's trying to get into the meeting but cannot access it. So could you look at that while we move forward, please, Wyn?
I'll try and invite them in now, Chair.
In which case, while we're doing that, can I have confirmation by silence that there are no disclosures of a conflict of interest in respect to this item? Thank you, members. And secondly, but again by silence, can I have confirmation that there are no disclosures of any prohibited party whip in accordance with section 78(3) of the local government measure? Thank you for that, members, and welcome Councillor Lucy, who has managed to make it into the meeting. In which case, I will hand you straight over to Councillor Phil Davies to introduce the officers, and then we'll move into our sole item of business, which is the report on Llanfihangel-Rhydython School.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can. Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, well, I'll hand over straight to Emma Palmer, who's going to, I believe, introduce the paper. Otherwise, we've got Eirig, Marianne, and other supporting officers. I'm just wary of the time, Councillor Pete, and obviously just want to get your opinions more than my loadings. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. Emma? If you could just briefly set the scene for people that are tuning in to us.
Thank you very much, Chair. So further to a decision made by Cabinet on the 9th of February, the Council did carry out consultation on the proposal to close Llanfihangel-Rhydython CP School from the 31st of August 2022, with pupils to attend their nearest alternative school. The purpose of the report before you and that will be considered by Cabinet is in relation to those responses received through the consultation to determine whether or not to proceed with the statutory process to close the school. And we welcome scrutiny today on the matter. There are a number of officers available. We have Marianne Evans, who is a Senior Manager for Transformation in Education. We have Eirig and Delith in respect of the CHADs, the Challenge Advisors and Schools Improvement. We have Sarah from HR and we have Mary from Finance. So between us all, Chair, we're hopeful that we can respond to your questions this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Emma. And while I'm waiting for colleagues to indicate who wants to go first, I've just got a simple process question for you. During the consultation, there was a change in information around Ysgol Maithrin, the Cilc Maithrin at Dolly, which was initially said to be unmaintained, but then clarified as maintained. The response from Estin tends to suggest that they responded before that was made apparent. Could you clarify whether Estin were properly informed that there was a Kilkmaithrin on site, and whether they have subsequently responded to that?
They haven't been informed because the information came to light as part of the consultation and then responded to in the consultation report. So no, they weren't aware of that, but the setting has been registered.
Okay, thank you for that. Is that, obviously you can't speak for them, but in your opinion, would that be likely to change anything in their response other than recognising that there was something on site?
I can't speak for them, but yeah, I'm not going to answer on behalf of Estin on that one. So.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I will move to Jake, and I think you'd indicated to me previously you wanted to focus on issues around Llanelwedd. So we'll take discussions around Llanelwedd and the proposal that was reviewed as in light of the consultation around the interactions between Llanelwedd and Dolly School in the first instance. So if members want to talk on that after Jake, please indicate now.
So Pete, how would you like me to take it? Because so just for other members' information, I set out in a bit of a statement to Councillor Peat yesterday, raising a number of points which would come out of, if you like, the statement that I was making. One of which was around Llanelwedd. Do you want me to try and extract things, Pete, or would it help if I just sort of set out my thoughts, because they sort of moved through in a bit of a process, providing at the end a bit of a challenge to officers around options that perhaps haven't been considered? Because I'm concerned about the rigor with which some of this process has taken place, and it leaves me with a number of doubts. So I'm a bit reluctant just to pull one thread out of that.
Expand on what you shared with me, because it does set the tone for those discussions around that last part of the impact assessment and response, where the Welsh language issue and the issue around interactions with Llanelwedd were brought to the forum and were discussed, and perhaps need a little bit more exploring on both counts.
Okay, if you're happy, I think what I might do, Pete, is just read through. It's not an incredibly long piece, but it means that I'm not trying to jump in and out and follow my notes. So what I was saying at the start there is that, as per Pete's instruction, I did go back and revisit the Cabinet papers from the 9th of February and make a comparison then to this week's report. And see how that differed, bearing in mind the consultation response that we'd had and Estin's comments, etc. And I was saying that I'm mindful for the case for transforming learning provision in Powys and the challenges and aspirations that that is entailed. And I am conscious in particular about the WESP conversations that we had at last week's scrutiny, and was feeling that actually there was a little bit of lack of joined upness in some of the opportunities. It felt quite a separate process, which will become clear through the thread that I'm taking you through just now. So the report then states that the review has been carried out in accordance with Rural Schools Code, which sets out a presumption against closure and requires that all viable alternatives must be conscientiously considered, including that of federation. What's concerning to me, as someone who's carried out numerous complex public consultation exercises in local government before around things like the local development plans, etc., is the lack of demonstrable engagement, listening and observable reflection, and then subsequent modification, so changing to demonstrate that we've listened as a council, that you might expect to see, particularly as the bar is set so high in conscientiously considering all viable alternatives. Indeed, the recommendations to Cabinet this month are no different really to those made in February. notwithstanding the consultation exercise, which may lead some to conclude that the process was little more than the council ticking some boxes. And I think we should really be avoiding that as a council. We need to really demonstrate that we are listening to people, reinforcing the preferred option. So it feels like a bit of self-justification in our process. And I think we need to take some learning points from this. Indeed, Estin's comments, I didn't find really an endorsement for the council's approach. And I found their language telling, in that they said that they went as far to say is that they considered that we had considered appropriately a range of options. Now that leaves a lot of room for doubt in my mind as to whether or not we're proceeding with, if we proceed with the recommendation at this point in time, it would be both judicious and legally sound as advised, or whether more reflection is needed to diligently and conscientiously consider perhaps one or two alternatives further. So the language is very important here. The bar is set high, and if you like, our external partner in reviewing our homework isn't, to my mind, prepared to use the same language to say that we are scoring highly on this. And I think we need to reflect on that and learn from it. And for me, there are a number of tensions and possible inaccuracies in the papers, and the lack of evidence of in-depth analysis and visible exploration of options. So we are acknowledging things, but I don't think we're visibly then exploring the options and explaining what we understand by some of those responses to consultations. And if you look at the SWOT, to my mind, that's rather superficially presented. We put it up and we say we've done it, and we're not demonstrating, I don't think, sufficiently that that is the case. So the case for closure has a number of strands to it, and I'm not aware what relative weight each one of those has been given. So if you've got 6 strands, are each of those strands of equal weight, and we need to get them all over the hurdle equally, or are the top 3 weighted more than the bottom 3? And we don't know that as Scrutiny, and the public don't know that. So which are more important? Are all the same? Is it about money or something else? Is it class numbers, sizes, etc., etc.? We need to think about explaining this more. The shared leadership with Llanelwedd School, we advised, has been a temporary arrangement. That's what the report was saying. We subsequently learned that arrangement has been ongoing for 6 years. And one of the reasons behind the case for closure is to end the temporary arrangements and give children the opportunity to attend a school with a permanent head, in so much as that can ever be guaranteed. Option 1, appraised, is the status quo. And that's what it says. And it says that's as a standalone school. But actually, in actual fact, we've got 2 schools operating very closely together. And I don't feel that that description adequately reflects the relatively stable circumstances, 6 years, of the shared leadership which exists, nor does it properly explore the possibility of such arrangements being formalized via the federation route. Indeed, I'm advised that the school has assiduously tried to pursue formal collaboration, including seeking conversion to become a Church in Wales school to facilitate collaboration, but this has been allegedly blocked by Powys. Whether or not this is correct, I can't say, but it doesn't feel to me like all viable alternatives are conscientiously being considered. The high budget per head is cited as part of the case for closure, but the consultation responses lead me to think that the figures we have been presented with here may not be accurate. And I would like clarification from officers on the actual costs of the ongoing in-year savings accrued from having a shared head and the additional transport costs of closure that are taken into consideration. So what is the actual gap that we are seeing? It's not £6,000 cost per pupil, it's something less. And as I said, what weight do we attach to that? You know, how many points extra does that give us in deciding? I'm concerned that the combined classes and deliverability of the curriculum are seen as justification for closure when we hear that Jeremy Miles on the radio, the educational minister, explains that rural schools were closely involved in drawing up the curriculum. And we learned from the school itself that they were successfully operating this prior to lockdown, and that their mixed classes are ideally disposed to its delivery as they provide children with the learning opportunity to support their peers around issues of interest. So I cannot see any independent evidence, it's not coming from Estin, to support the claims that combined classes make pupil challenge difficult, especially, of course, when Estin rate the school as good and green in 2019. And as such, I do wonder what weight, if any, should be attributed to this part of the case for closure. I'm sure that others will make much more of the school being at capacity. To me, that sounds like it's operating at an optimum level, whilst others are running below optimum levels. In this context, I think it is puzzling that Lambista, for instance, has been allowed, with the consent of Powys Council, to exceed its capacity so considerably when Cross Gates, its neighbour, has so many spare places. Whilst I have to declare an interest here as an LEA governor at Uscol Trevonen, I can at least see a rationale for their higher numbers because they're running the Welsh stream, which is so vitally important to delivering Welsh in education. And so to my last substantive point. Last week, I raised concerns once again about the lack of clarity around proposals regarding Ysgol Calon Cymru, the new Welsh-only school in Builth, and its feeder network. Officers agreed that there were a number of unresolved issues and uncertainties, including developing sufficiency of pupil numbers learning in Welsh. It is striking that Estin made clear that these proposals for Dalai School are neutral in respect of their impact on this council's Welsh language ambitions, which we heard last week are so important. And having looked at the papers, I do wonder whether we have missed an opportunity to fully consider whether Dalai School, either alone or on this site, or in federation with a larger sister school, and I make no observation as to who that might be, might not be converted over time to provide Welsh medium provision to act as a hub, drawing in pupils from East Radnorshire schools. And because I can't currently see how those East Radnorshire Welsh language needs are going to be properly addressed in the plans that I've seen for us to go forward. Now, I've got no wish to make policy on the hoof. That's not my role or the role here for Scrutiny, only to raise questions about that. But I do feel it was incumbent on me as a member of Scrutiny to ensure that all viable options are fully considered by Cabinet before an evidently much loved and passionately supported rural school like this, which we see would leave a gap in this geography, is actually lost, especially as I feel that there are some avenues yet to be considered. So I'm sorry that was a bit of a ramble. I'm sorry I've sort of gone through my prepared thoughts, but I have given this a lot of time and effort to think through that. And there are some questions in there that I could see Emma and Marianne noting down. So I hope that you can help me and others come through those. And perhaps, who knows, there is something there for us at the end of this just to consider and go away and reflect upon and think that there might yet be alternatives for us to have a look at. Thanks, Pete. Thank you very much for your forbearance.
Thanks, Jake, for that. You've actually picked out virtually all of the different areas that I would be looking to take us through during this session. So if officers can bear Jake's wider comments in mind, I'd like us in the first instance to talk about Llanelwedd, because that did come up as a potential option. I've got a couple of specifics that I'll throw into the mix before you respond. The first one is, what will be the financial impact on Llanelwydd of these changes in terms of their cost per pupil? And the second one, the very specific one, is if you look at the Carno to Carno cluster, they are 11 miles from end to end. Llanelwydd is 14.5 miles between the two. So they are comparable in terms of distance apart. Yet your documentation references them to being in the Bilth catchment, when in actual fact the Bilth doesn't effectively exist as a catchment because it's all part of the Ascol Callum Cymru cluster. So I'd like you to give me some reassurance about the impact on Llanelwydd in respect of these changes, because it represents a significant alteration to their status as a result of this. And I'm concerned that you are not necessarily considering fully the potential of federation by whichever means. So I don't know who wants to come forward on that first, because it's not as structured as I would like it to be honest.
If I start, Councillor Pete, and then I'll probably call on others as we go forward. So I'll start with your first question. Cost per pupil at Llanelwydd. If this proposal goes forward, the impact will be that the head teacher of Llanelwydd, who is currently also acting head teacher in Llanelwydd, would return to his substantive post. Mary will be able to correct me, but there wouldn't be an impact. That wouldn't affect the cost per pupil at Llanelwydd. Mary, am I right there?
Yes, you're right. In terms of the council's costs, that wouldn't have an impact. There would be some impact on Llanelwydd's budget and their spend. It really depends on whether they look at another shared headship or whether Adam goes back full time to Llanelwydd then. But at the moment they're in a surplus position.
Okay, so it won't impact their cost per pupil because that's based on the school funding formula, but there will be an impact on the budgetary position of the school.
Yes, yeah, okay. A slight one. A slight one.
Will that still keep them within? Will that still keep them within budget?
I'd have to check the detail on that.
Sorry, Chair. All I want to make the observation is that I would expect Llanelwydd to be paying to somebody some monies to fulfil the substantive role of the headship of Llanelwydd as well, potentially on site in Llanelwydd. So again, it is a complex question, but actually would need some looking into. But I can't see a massive impact on the Llanelwydd proposal. And like as much as it's a good question, it again is not relevant to the Dolly proposal as yet.
Thanks for that, Phil. I appreciate the as yet, because there is still the substantive question as to the viability of federation or more formal arrangements between those two schools. Now, we'll look at the Church in Wales aspect is a complicating factor, but there are ways around it. So I'm interested to see more detail from officers as to why that is not a viable solution, bearing in mind that it is, in many ways, it would be a small modification of the status quo.
Okay, I'll go back to the beginning with the original options. So when we started this work, is probably this time last year, looking at the issues, the challenges faced by Llanfihangel School, and then what options or solutions were available to address those. We have a number of options, as you can see from the papers, that we considered. And in reference to Llanelwedd, because that's the topic in discussion at the moment, we did not include Llanelwedd in those options because primarily, and you mentioned Carno, Glantwymen, Llanbramaer, primarily we tend to federate schools or merge schools that are in the local vicinity. So we looked at the geographic area of Dolai, Llanmihangel and looked at the school, the neighbouring schools there. So therefore we did not include Llanelwedd in that mix. Carno, Glantwymen and Llanbramaer, yes, they're within 15-mile radius, but they're actually neighbouring schools, and that's why, you know, they work with the federation. So going forward then, in terms of the option for federating or bringing Llanelwedd and Llanmihangel Rhydaethon together, as you can see, it did come out as a potential alternative option as during consultation, and we carried out the process as required by the code in terms of assessing alternative options, alternative reasonable options that we felt were appropriate against those factors outlined in the code for rural schools, which are impact on the quality and standards of education, impact on the community, and impact on transport. And throughout all of this, and I have to stress this, everything, and I think Jake, you mentioned this earlier, what are the drivers, or what are where are the weightings? Is anything more important than the other? The issue is that we always have to bear in mind what the challenges are facing Llanmihangel Rhydaethon, and those stated in the consultation document. So when we assess options, reassess our options, assess alternative options, we have to find a way to sort of to see whether they address those issues or the challenges raised. In terms of federation, as noted in the consultation report, you can see, and I think we need some clarity around the terminology, federation. It's been bandied about quite a lot. Many people think it means one thing, other people think it means another thing. The term federation is a legal term which is around formal federation of schools according to Federation of Maintained Schools Wales legislation, which means a single governing body over two or more schools. And it would be up to that single governing body then to decide if it had one head or two heads, and we have examples of both in the county. We cannot legally federate a Church in Wales school and a community primary school. So the only way forward in terms of bringing the schools together would be that we would have to merge them. And by merging, we could do it one or both ways, as outlined in the document. So we could close both schools and reopen as a Church in Wales school, as a community primary school. That would be up for debate. We could close one or the other and open it again as a two-sited school. So there are different ways of approaching the merger option. So we have assessed those, and the conclusion of our assessment, which we are required to consider, do they address those challenges? And our conclusion is that it would not address the challenges outlined in the consultation document. I'll stop there.
Okay. Emma, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. There was just something also that Councillor Jake referred to earlier, and it was in respect of lack of engagement, listening, reflecting on the consultation. I just wanted to draw Scrutiny's attention to the 354-page consultation report that considers absolutely every consultation response that has been received and provides a comment against every response. So I refute that the organisation lacked engagement and listening. The consultation has been undertaken, consideration has been given to each of the responses, but just because you go out to consultation, it doesn't automatically mean that the end result will be different. There can be amendments, it can be completely different, and you can have to go out, you can be in a position whereby you would need to go out to consultation again on a different proposal. But just by going out to consultation doesn't mean to say that it automatically would result in a difference in the final paper, because if something through that consultation doesn't significantly change the original element, then it wouldn't necessitate that amendment. But the consultation is very thorough, and officers have spent the whole of the summer making sure that they spend the appropriate time giving due consideration to each of those, because we appreciate this is a very important matter.
Thank you for that. I'm going to let Jake come back in a second, but I would ask colleagues to reflect on the fact that we were originally scheduled to look at this item in July, and it has taken until now to get the papers ready for us. So, and again, building on what you say, to be fair to you, the impact assessments in particular have drawn a fair bit of information out of what has been submitted, and we will come back and focus on them later. Jake, you wanted to come back? Yeah,
and it's not to get into a row with them or anybody else. I have read the response, so it's not if I've ignored 300 pages of responses. I have seen that there are responses against each of the points made. I think my take on that is that some of those responses feel to me like they're designed to provide closure, and I can understand why. So they're not inviting a wider discussion. It's sort of noted, yes, we're doing that, etc., etc. And my perception, Emma, is that actually what they weren't doing is saying, you've actually raised a really good point there, and we'll go away and think about that. So, you know, Marianne, you also said, yes, we did go and look at all of these options, and I will challenge you to say, well, so where do we see the work that you then went away and did around the Llanelwedd merger? And it feels like, well, that's behind the scenes. So a bit like Emma's just said, well, yes, we gave a lot of thought to that, but actually the design of the response, that doesn't come across in the response that you see. It's very much, yeah, sorted, move on. And actually, I think having read quite a bit of stuff that I've received through the post from the school itself, as others probably have recently, you'll see that they've almost taken offence about the way that they feel that they've been shortchanged by the consideration given to the effort that they put in providing those responses. So they feel it's sort of closed down. And whether you change for this time or not, because obviously we can't change where we're at, I just think it comes across as a tone that just says we're not listening, we don't want to listen, and I think we just need to reflect on that a little bit about how you might come across in the future. So not for a long row, Emma. No, I can see a lot of work's gone in, but it's left a perception, and that's what people fed back to me.
Thanks for that, Jake. Does anyone else want to come in on the questions around Llanelwedd? Because that was very much a standalone section that came up during discussion, and I wasn't convinced reading the documentation that it had been explored fully, and I think you've given us a slightly fuller explanation now. Okay, in which case I'm going to move on to the Welsh language as we're looking at those two potentially together. I have quite a bit of concern around the responses in respect of the Welsh language. I think we need to look at this in respect of the WESP that was approved for consultation yesterday by Cabinet, where there is an aspiration to establish a Welsh language primary school in the East Radnor area. Now, one of the problems we see in Crickell and Haytalgarth is that there's the statement there isn't the lack of nursery provision to lead to Welsh language able pupils coming through. We have an Ysgolfaethrin, a Cilchmaethrin on site, which, if you look through the consultation responses, appears to have a through flow of between 10 and 15 pupils a year within a couple of years. If you look at the comments from from parents, 1714 says lots of lessons in Welsh as well as English. 17110 are taught bilingually, it trickles out into the community. And then 1711, we put 3 staff onto the Welsh sabbatical programme. Well, I looked at the data in the WESP document. We put 39 members of staff through that programme. So we've got a third of staff that we've invested in line with our Welsh language workforce programme, in a school that we're now proposing to close, which we may lose. So I'd like some explanation and exploration around just how much effort has been put in, because when you look at the responses to some of those points, they all seem to miss the fact that there appears to be far more immersion in the Welsh language in the school than just we teach them Welsh as a second language. And those comments seem to be dismissed almost entirely as it's an English medium school, therefore it has no impact whatsoever. So I've got a few things I'll come back on that, but welcome some initial input and response to that.
Okay, I'll start and I'll bring in Delith and Eric possibly. Yes, there is a Cylch Meithrin on the site, established in 2019. I think it currently has around 12 pupils. They also they provide childcare for preschoolers from age 2 onwards, flourishing with a waiting list, I believe. So they offer 3+ childcare funded hours as well. They do operate from a demountable on school site, which was an old mobile of the school, and the council has given 10,000 to the Cylch to refurbish that demountable through the Welsh Government's capital grants, childcare capital grants. Our view is we have identified that there would be an impact on the Cylch Meithrin should parents decide to choose childcare at any other setting. You know, if they were transferring to another school and there was a early years provider there, then they would attend that. So we do acknowledge that. However, we would also state that the Cylch could continue to operate from Dolai if there was demand, and I fully understand that if the proposal goes ahead and that the school was closed, then the council's policy is to dispose of assets, etc. There would be then potentially be an impact on whether the demountable would then be removed as well. But I think we'd be open to discussions with the Cylch, with Mudiad, around the use of that demountable. So that's something that we would keep in mind. Also, we do have a concern because Mudiad Meithrin's, from Mudiad Meithrin's point of view, they wish to have, as we do, early years provision from preschool, and then the continuation into Welsh medium provision. So we do have a concern that that isn't the case in Llanfihangel Rhydython. It is classed as an English medium school, but we are aware that, you know, Welsh is spoken in school, Welsh is taught in the school, and Delith can come in a bit on that. So we do have a concern there, but we would see that, you know, there are possibilities around the Cylch Meithrin that we could explore further.
Okay, I'll hear from Delith now if you want to add more to that.
Yes, Prynhawn da. I just want to maybe enhance a little bit on the Welsh language provision at the school, where a lot of the parents have commented that it's really supportive and they get a lot of Welsh provision. Well, as you know, moving with the new curriculum, and the expectation is that all schools develop and plan for the 4 purposes, and of course, Welsh language is statutory, and all schools provide a high level of weekly Welsh lessons, Welsh activities, and also informal activities, as you heard last week with the WESP through the Siarter Iaith. With the sabbatical, yes, I acknowledge the 3 members of staff from Dolau have attended the sabbatical. If I'm honest with you, there have been gaps in the provision, primarily due to COVID, but also other logistics with Powys and the geographical challenge. And the sabbatical programme is currently running now in Newtown and also virtual. And we do have members of staff from neighbouring schools attending the sabbatical course now. So there is an expectation that staff, all schools, will develop the workforce for the Welsh language, because obviously we need practitioners to be able to deliver Welsh independently to their children in their schools. So there's a big focus and a big drive on normalising the Welsh language and on developing the workforce across all our primary schools and secondary, of course. And I think I've covered the two issues there, the sabbatical and the provision. Is that right, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, yeah, there are more staff going through, but the WESP says we've got 18 more going through this year. It's still a substantial loss to the workforce if there are not other opportunities within Powys. And looking at the broader context, the WESP identifies that area as an area to develop a Welsh medium primary school. There is no there's no Maithrin presence in Radnor Valley, in Knighton, in Prestine. Surely this is the ideal opportunity to build on what is already present in the community, to look at this school location as the location of that primary school within the WESP. You already have a flow of pupils coming through. Interestingly, I perhaps should have asked for this before, but how many of the pupils currently going to the Welsh Stream in Ysgol Trefonen would actually be coming into Dolly if this were designated as a Welsh school, or have a bilingual stream within it? I'm concerned that these information is not within the consultation response to actually, in the section around the proposal for a Welsh language presence there, it doesn't actually give me confidence that the information is there to actually categorically say that that is not an option.
Can I just, Emma?
Whoever wants to come in.
Yeah, go ahead, Marianne, and then if it,
I think, yes, we do, with Welsh medium education, as you know, we have, Cabinet has approved the WESP for consultation, and we will be progressing with that and ambitious plans. However, I think we just need to have a bit of a, I'm going to say, a reality check, but think of the context. We have a small school in Dolau with 36 pupils, 36 capacity. And I think, Councillor Pete, you mentioned maybe a stream. Well, the problem of a small school is going to be even more exacerbated if you begin to split the school by language as well. So that is probably one of the reasons that we've discounted a dual stream option there, because it would be really difficult to change a school fully into a Welsh medium school without having to have some kind of streaming to begin with, especially as there's no Welsh medium. It's not a Welsh medium school, it's not a dual stream school, so we'd have to start from scratch.
But you're going to have to do that in any of the schools in that area, and this school already has the flow of pupils potentially coming in into a Welsh stream from the Maithrin.
Yes, but we'd have to make sure that the provision in the primary is appropriate for the continuation of Welsh medium education from the early years on to the into primary, and that is going to take, that will take a long time, and you'll be dealing with small numbers throughout. So it's about, we have to consider that as well in the round. And for us as officers, we don't think that is. It's not an appropriate solution to address the challenges faced by Llanfihangel and Llangollen as stated in our consultation document.
Okay, let's look a little wider. and before we move on from the Welsh language, within the impact assessment, you state that the impact on the Welsh language is neutral, but in it you cite the risk to the Cilc Maithrin. How can there be something? How can this change be neutral when you're identifying the risk that a Welsh language provision in the area is under threat?
I think it's neutral because the provision could continue. Yes, we've acknowledged there is a risk, but it can continue. And there is continuation of Welsh medium provision in Llandrindod at Trefonen if parents wanted that continuation. So that's why it's neutral.
Okay, and I'm unconvinced. Do other colleagues have any other comments to come in on the Welsh language issues? I'm feeling very much on my own today. Eirik.
I just wanted to come in and just clarify what Marianne was saying there. If the pupils transfer from the Cilc Maithrin into Dolau, that is not a continuation of their Welsh medium education. Whereas if they transfer from the Cilc Maithrin to Ysgol Trefonen and into the Welsh stream, that would be a continuation. So therefore, that's why it wouldn't be. That's why it's a neutral position if Llanfihangel Rydaithon was to close as a school. It wouldn't have an impact on the Welsh medium for those pupils because the Welsh medium provision is at Ysgol Trefonen. So I just wanted to explain.
Okay, I understand that. I think my counter to that is we're looking at problems of transition, relatively high numbers, 20% of pupils not transitioning. You have the TRV in Llanbista, TRV and Cilc in Dolau. We haven't got any information here on potential latent requirements from Knighton Prestine. You have, to my mind, there isn't the evidence within the documentation to say that there isn't a strong potential of establishing a Welsh school at this site. I take Marianne's point, you're going to have small class numbers and moving through. Well, at some point, you're going to have that in whichever school that you choose there, because none of the schools in East Radnorshire are dual stream, they're all English stream. So wherever you do it, that is going to happen. My point would be that achieving that transition, given what is in front of us, may be more achievable at this school than others. And Marianne, you'll come back, but I think Jake wants to come in as well. And let's take both and then have you respond, because I do want to move on.
Yeah, Pete, I mean, I suppose that the point I wanted to come back on, Eirik saying that what they would assume is that pupils would go from here into the Welsh stream Ysgol Trefonen. But of course, we see that that is one of the schools that doesn't have the capacity unless something else changes. So I think the school numbers are 208 at the moment. It's identified, like Llanbista, at being over capacity. And, you know, normally my answer to the question when someone asks, how do you eat an elephant? And you say, you know, one mouthful at a time. I think here we're not seeing the elephant. And that is, you know, what we're going to do in East Radnor around Welsh provision, as Peter said. So whether you look at Prestine or Knighton, and you know, you've still got Cross Gates, etc. You've got this provision that we haven't looked at how we solve that wider problem. And I think I was alluding, and Peter has said, providing a challenge here too. And we're asking the what if we were to you know, look at that provision here as a means of providing a, you know, a Welsh hub here, because what you haven't convinced me is, Marianne, you said, yes, it's too small here, it'll be hard. Well, where is it easy? And where is the evidence that, you know, you're telling us what your strategic plans are in respect of that? Because in the absence of that, then this remains a viable option that I'm not certain we've properly discounted. So I know it's going round in circles, but I'm not yet convinced we've burst this bubble.
I'll just come back. It was exactly the point I was going to make. When we plan the development of Welsh medium provision strategically, as in probably every other authority, you would look at where your critical mass was, because that's where the numbers are. So I know we've just, Cabinet has just approved the Dyffryn Trannon proposal, which is in a rural area. But going forward, we'd see that developments happen in areas of with critical mass in towns. That's really how all other authorities develop their Welsh medium provision. If we need to make sure that the numbers could then flow into that school, because the numbers would be there. You know, you're talking about your Welsh schools, your Newtown, Brecon, the main towns. I'm not having said that, you know, obviously if there were need and demand elsewhere, we would look at that as well. But in the main, planning Welsh medium provision at a primary level, we would need to look at where the critical mass is. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course it makes sense, but it doesn't answer the point about, yes, we might have critical mass in Prestine and Knighton, but my worry about that is they are essentially non-Welsh speaking towns. The council has an ambition for transition to much higher levels of Welsh speaking, which it means at some point we're going to have to tackle the nutty issues of the East Radnorshire. And the problem, if it is a problem with Knighton and Prestine in particular, is that they will be, we could leak children across the border around the introduction of Welsh around those schools. And bearing in mind the distance from Dolai to Trevonen, Dolai to Prestine or Knighton, all I was trying to say is, bearing in mind we have to explore all viable alternatives, have we really put the lid on the idea of this school remaining and drawing pupils in to provide a Welsh hub away from the border? Because actually my perception is it's going to be very hard to introduce those streams in Prestine and Knighton, where English is very clearly the first language. Sorry to keep coming back, Marion.
Emma, you wanted to come in, and then we'll draw this section to a close, and I'll come to Amanda on questions around transport.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take us back to, from a strategic perspective, and understand why we've embarked on the transformation. I appreciate that today's paper is about a proposal, about a specific school, but understanding that in the wider context is really important. Why we have to remember, because I appreciate these are very difficult and emotive subjects for people within the community. But as a community leader, in terms of representing the organisation, we have a responsibility to ensure there is equity across the county, and that is not the case as it stands at the moment in whatever language we refer to, whether that be Welsh medium or English medium. And when we did the extensive engagement with many stakeholders back probably 2 years ago now, with schools, communities, teachers, parents, members, you know, anybody who wanted to engage within the process, people wanted us to focus on learner entitlement, on a reduced infrastructure, and making sure that the resources for education were going into education and providing the very best that we could. And we used things like world-class education. And I think at the moment, in terms of today's debate and focusing around Welsh Medium West was last week. There are strands. Things aren't being seen in isolation as a team. Weekly, the team come together and make the correlations through. But you will have heard me say before, Chair, that there are critical paths that we have to follow to unlock some of the change for the greater good across the authority. And whilst some of this may be difficult in one area, it's almost at a cost of other children not having the same in Powys. And when you look at this area within the county, factually, there are a number of other schools in the area that can provide the quality of education that is currently being provided in this area. And I think I just wanted to just reiterate really back to some of that strategic context and understanding that the status quo is not sustainable for a number of different reasons. And I'm sure we'll get into some other areas through your scrutiny this afternoon. But just to remember, there's a balance from an organisational perspective around equity across the county for all children, versus something that is relevant for a community. And I think as an organisation, we've got to balance that off whilst making sure that the children do get the very best that they deserve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Emma. It's also worth reflecting, though, that at that time you'd also brought in the head of the school in Dolgellau, where they had a model that was looking at a single school in a cluster, and that's not been moved forward. So there have been changes and there are differences. So it's worth reflecting that this has evolved, and certain things that were being put forward at that time haven't materialised in the way that some people might have hoped to see them materialise. Does anyone else have any questions that have come out of that section? If not, we'll move on. I'll move on to Councillor Amanda. You want to ask some things about transport and a specific question around the surplus, I believe.
Yeah, I've got a few questions actually, and I'm not quite sure where to start. I think I'd like to start by sort of helping my understanding a bit, if that's okay, because obviously not being in that area of the county, it's quite difficult just from the papers to see how this fits in with the wider picture. And one of the things that I immediately noticed when reading through was the issues with pupils and Llanbista School, because obviously Llanbista is at capacity. And I'd like to really understand how this, as a holistic picture in the area, how come Llanbista isn't the options to do with either merging with Llanbista or closing Llanbista and this school and opening a school on one of those sites. I just would like some more explanation on that option, given that Llanbista is at capacity, and you know why this school is being looked at in isolation at the moment. So that's my first area of questioning, please.
Amanda, if we focus on that, I've got some questions around wider school capacity. So let's have a discussion around capacity in general at this point.
And that then leads me on to school transport costs, Pete, which is why I identify school transport as a theme. But yeah, happy to do it that way. Yeah.
So Marianne, would you? I don't know who's going to respond on that one.
Right. Shall I respond on the first one?
Yeah.
And then Mary will come in on the school transport costs. So are we talking about Llanbista in particular, or are we talking about the capacities issues?
Well, let's talk about Llanbista, and then I'll expand it with some questions on capacity. Claire, you've got a hand up. If it's around capacity, keep the hand up and I'll bring you in first. If not, I'll come back to you after.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Right. I'll the question is, why aren't we considering Llanbista as part of this review? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think because obviously when in the documents where it's talking about where pupils can go to if this option is to close, and then you know from looking at that they can't go to Llanbista, and yet when I read through the different option appraisals, I think it's options 11 and 12, they're not seen as being able to be taken forward, and I'm just struggling to see why Llanbista's future and this school's future aren't being considered together.
we did consider them together back in 2016, and the issue at that time was there was not enough spaces for pupils to go to. However, back in 2016 as well, during those consultations, it was pointed out that Llanbista had a number of young babies, children coming through. Llanbista's numbers have doubled more or less in the last 3 or 4 years, to the point where the school is over capacity. And then this year, over this summer, and I think the job is done now, a third classroom was put into Llanbista because they couldn't accommodate the pupils. So the capacity of Llanbista is increasing to 73, 74. I can't recall the exact figure. So there is capacity in Llanbista should Llanfihangel Rydaithon school close. So we're going back to your options. We did consider merging, etc., and federating with Llanbista, and the options were discounted. And really going back to my original point is, when we consider those options, we consider what are the challenges facing Llanfihangel Rydaithon. Will those options address? And I think the conclusion at that point was that any merging or federating with Llanbista wouldn't address the issues. Does that help?
It does, and I didn't know that Llanbista then from September won't be over capacity, because in that initial document I'm not sure it makes that fully clear.
Okay, I stated in the consultation report, so it's in there, but amongst all the pages. But okay. It's in the work was undertaken in August, so it's only newly opened with a third classroom.
Okay, and then my other questions, Pete, are more to do with the school transport costs. So if you wanted to carry on the capacity theme, then happy for you to come back to that.
Let's keep moving on the capacity, and then I'll come back to you on transport. Claire, would you like to come in?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, so currently Crossgates School has a capacity of 210. If the 35 pupils, I should say, from Llanfihangel Rydaithon moved to Crossgates, then that would only leave them with a 44 pupil surplus. What's concerning me is you've got the 6 children that are in the Kilch that could potentially move into Llanfihangel Rydaithon in September. What's concerning me is that when these pupils move to Crossgates, if this was taken forward, then their siblings, any other new pupils moving to the area, we know that there's a housing development happening, those surplus places are going to be taken up super quickly. People we know have moved into Dolly Village and to build houses simply because of the school being the hub of the community. It's a very virile community, they're very close-knit community, and I'm just really concerned that these surplus spaces in Crossgates are just going to be snapped up. And then, it might not be that the 2 siblings or 3 siblings could actually attend school together. I have got more comments on transport, which again, I can come into later on, but that is my key issue at this point.
Let's keep the focus on this. And Margaret, let's have your comment as well on this so that we can take them all together.
Yes, fine. Looking at the figures that you've provided for all the schools that are possible, that would be possible for the children to go to from when the school was closed. At the moment, 8 of them, 8 classes, 8 year groups are over 30 in those schools. So my issue is, are those children who are in those year groups of over 30, are they educated in classes over 30, or are there split age classes in that school? Because we've already read about the issues in the document about split age classes. So I'd like some figures on that.
I'm going to expand that a little bit more specifically. At Crossgates School, in years 4, 5, 6, there are 57 pupils spread across 2 mixed age classes, a 4, 5 and a 5, 6. Looking at the numbers coming from Llanfihangel Rydaithon, if you would put them into Crossgates, and obviously we don't know where they are going to go, but both of those classes would go considerably over the 30, which means you're probably looking at needing to split them into 3 single age classes. You've also got the ALM provision being added in, which will take out 1 classroom. So actually, is there capacity within the building to actually initiate that split into 3 classes? Is that going to require an additional teacher, in which case that will have an impact on the cost savings of the closure? And if those things were to happen, how much capacity would the school actually have as surplus? Because once you've answered that, I'm going to come back with you with a wider question about the Ysgol Callum Cymru catchment as a whole.
Okay. Right, okay. Capacity of Crickhowell, sorry, wrong catchment.
Not yet.
Capacity of Crossgates is currently 210. Okay, they have 126 pupils currently on roll, which means there's 84 surplus places there, which could easily accommodate all the pupils in Llanfihangel Rhydython. However, as Councillor Pete says, one of the classes is now currently being used as an ALN satellite centre. So that provision is started in September, which would reduce the capacity of Crossgates down to 180. So there would still be 54 places left in Crossgates should, on the revised capacity. We haven't updated the capacity calculations yet, so that's why they're not verified, but that's the situation. Crossgates has sufficient capacity to take the pupils of Rhydython should they wish to go there. The other thing I have to say as well, from our analysis, it does show that some pupils are closer to Llanbista. I think there's five pupils closer to Llanbista. There's a couple closer to Knighton. There's a few closer to other schools. So in all likelihood, as with all school reorganisation proposals, we do tend to see that the parents make a choice. The parents don't choose to send the receiving school together. So parental choice, parental preference will come into this, and we'll have to reflect that. In terms of the class sizes, I'll just carry on with the siblings. I think that was the question. What if it becomes full, and where do siblings lie? Well, the response to that is that the admissions policy would then kick in. If the school is any school is oversubscribed, parents make an application for a place, and then if it's full, then the oversubscription criteria kicks in, and siblings is one of the criteria for allocating a place. And in terms of the class structure in Crossgates, should the proposal go forward, and the pupils will choose to attend Crossgates, then the response to this, and I think Eirig will probably back me up here, is school leaders, the head along with the governors of schools, always adapt their class structures to the pupil numbers as they fluctuate, and we all know they fluctuate, and also in terms of the needs of learners. So I don't know, Eirig, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well,
I think before Eric comes in, my specific was around the bricks and mortar. With additional numbers going into those classes, will the classrooms sustain those additional numbers to retain at 2? Or if it does have to be split into a year 4, a year 5 and a year 6, is there an extra classroom there that class can be put into? Looking at the numbers, there appears to be surplus capacity across each individual year. And my concern is that whilst the numbers may be there might not be the physical room within the building to split the class and have classes that are legally within fire limits. That's where my question comes from. I know there's spare space, but is that usable space?
Yes.
The SEM classrooms in Crossgates, all of them aligned to the minimum requirements for a class of 30. One classroom is currently being used now as a satellite centre. Remember that's a pilot, and we'll see how that progresses. I think then the conversation would be if that 7th class needed again for mainstream pupils in Crossgates, and that would be a conversation we'd have with our ALN colleagues.
So at the moment, if the change were to occur and the 7th classroom were to be needed, which on the surface it looks like it could be, you would have disruption to an ALM provision that you've just put in place.
Remember, it's a pilot, as I said, and that'll be evaluated at the end of this first year. Yes, everything is up for discussion and debate, isn't it? But what I can say, there are 7 classrooms in Crossgate, 6 currently being used, 1 being used for the ALN satellite pilot, and obviously the school will manage pupil numbers. And if the 7th classroom does need to come back into mainstream, then that'll be a conversation that we'll have with the school and our ALN colleagues.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to clear that up because it's quite an important factor.
Yeah, no, I was just coming in on it would be the governing body decision as to how they structure the class sizes there. Having more pupils into the school obviously will give them more finances to have an additional teacher if needed. You know, the question you said, would there be an impact on there? Yes, there probably would, but also then that would have a positive impact hopefully on the class sizes and be able to adjust those down. That would be a decision for a governing body to take rather than for a local authority, but you'd have enough, there's enough space inside the school, enough classes inside the school that they could restructure that.
Actually, you make a pertinent point there, Ari. If pupils, how many pupils would need to transfer into Crossgates for it to go up an extra step in terms of the funding formula so that the additional money would be available to them and it wouldn't be in the position that we've seen other schools where they've got 1 pupil too few to get the additional funding to get the additional class. How many more would be needed to make that happen?
I'm going to turn to Mary now because she's the one on the formula.
I am. So yeah, they've got 100 in Crossgates. They've got 126 at the moment. That when we did the modelling, they had 122 pupils. So 150 would be the next step up for the next class. So that's 28. And when we did the modelling, we did see that going over the 150 for Crossgates. So the savings that have been identified in the consultation document would have included that additional funding going to Crossgates then through the formula.
But from what you've said there, Mary, it makes it almost imperative because of the additional class that is likely to be needed for a very large percentage of the Llanfihangel-Rhydytham pupils to transfer. Otherwise, you could the school could find itself in a position where it has to put on an additional class because classrooms at an individual year group are full, but they don't have the money for it. Emma, I think you're coming in as well, and then I'll take Margaret's comment.
Thanks, Councillor Pete. I think we can't preempt whether all those children are going to go to Crossgates. So in terms of the modelling, we try and look through the possibilities of section to give an estimated figure then in terms of the impact of doing so. But I think even if we weren't here talking about specific proposals, the schools themselves every year and the governing bodies themselves are dealing with these things year in, year out and making the adjustments accordingly. And I think from an operational perspective, that is something that sits for them rather than being predetermined or dictated by us. But obviously we would work with them with the existing processes and policies and any other school across the county to support whatever provision is required based on the numbers in the area.
Thanks for that, Emma. And I see in the chat that Marianne has found some additional information that they're actually running 5 classes. So there are bricks and mortar there, but to enable that, but they may need to employ an additional teacher without any additional income. So we could be in making this change, we could be putting some financial pressures onto that school in order to make the numbers work. Yeah, Ira, you want to come in, but I'm going to take Margaret first. She's had her hand up for a few minutes. And Marianne, if you wanted to add something, I'll come to you. But if it was just to clarify what you put in the chat, please. So, Margaret.
Yeah, it was just over the 8 schools, which is not Crossgates, who've already got classes at this moment of over 30. And it just links with the information that comes in the pack regarding the small schools with mixed ages. And one of the arguments for a larger school, and I don't, fully understand where the reasons that you don't have mixed ages. Now we've got 8-year groups in the schools that can be chosen that have got over 30. Now, are those classes running at over 30, or do we have mixed age groups? And I know it's not up to the authority. I know it's governing bodies and school management that determine, but it's an argument that you are putting forward regarding mixed age groups. So how many of those 8 are in mixed age groups, and overall, how many of the schools that they can go to that other than the have mixed age groups?
Okay, I'll come in. And probably you follow. Yes, the Llanbista is probably the smallest or the closest in size to Llanfihangel, and as I said, that is split into 3 classes of mixed age groups. So reception year 1, year 2, reception year 1, year 2 in one class, and then key stage 2 split into 2 different classes. I think, and you'll correct me, the other schools, Trefonen and Kemplys in Llandrindod would probably have mixed age classes, but only of maybe 1 or 2 years. And I think that's the real issue here, isn't it? It's Llanfihangel Rhydyton is currently 2 classes with 4 age groups. And I think that's the concern that we have, is the scale of that age group. We know schools in Powys aren't large enough to have single age classes. Only a few of them have single age classes right through. Most tend to have 1 or 2. But actually, it's the very small 2-class schools that give us concern. I don't know, Eric, do you want to elaborate further?
Yeah, obviously it's more complicated with Ysgol Trefonen because they've got the 2 streams as well. So, and they do fluctuate, and I'm aware that, the governors have to decide each year the composition of each of their classes. Depending on the number of children that are coming in and leaving the school. So it's never that easy. It's trying to have as few mixed age, an age range within the classes as possible would be our wish within schools. If there are 2 age ranges, that's slightly easier to plan and deliver than if you've got 4 age ranges within your age range within a class. So I think most of the schools there do have mixed age ranges, but it would be only 1 2-year groups within that.
Thanks for that. Claire, would you like to come in, and then Margaret, and then I've got final questions in this area.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to say, I think that having the mixed age groups isn't necessarily a bad thing. From what I understand, the children support each other. They have that bond. It gives the teachers the chance to challenge the more able pupils. It gives the teachers chance to support the less able. And it really does give those children in that classroom the ability to support each other. And peer working, as we all know, is an absolute vital part of primary school education. And from talking to the governors, parents of the school, it works really well. So I cannot see how that argument can stand during this this consultation. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Claire. Officers needn't come back on that one, because the final area, when we've covered everything else that I want to look at, is the issue of the curriculum and small schools. So I'll come back to that. Margaret, do you have anything?
Yeah, it was really over that we could do with evidence of this from Powys, because we must have evidence that is telling us, that gives us that information that children fare better with less year groups in the class. And we must have evidence for it, and it should be there available with the information we've had.
Okay, thanks for that, Margaret. As I say, we will talk on that in a minute. I'm going to round off this section by referencing to 14.1.18 in the consultation, where officers are talking about the wider catchment and growth. And this is a significant concern that I have. We have the two new estates on Itham Road in 2 phases, one of which is now almost completely complete. One is about to be completed, and then a further development that is in planning and will go through within the next 2 to 3 years, the build cycle. We have a new estate in Llanddewi, and we have infill development in a number of other locations. Now, in the documentation that's been supplied, it states that these issues will be considered in a wider review of the Ysgol Callum Cymru catchment, which is being dealt with in the next wave. In Cabinet, you had the commitment given that that was going to take place as part of the Ysgol Callum Cymru review. So if you have potential pressures coming in from new development, potential pressures coming in from growth and movement, and I know in your comments you also highlighted that there were reductions last year in house sales. That's not surprising considering the market was effectively closed for 3 months. So those stats that are in the report are, I would say, slightly misleading. If this review is taking place, surely that overrides the review on this site, because you may actually need that capacity as the growth in requirements in Llandrindod displaces pupils out to Crossgates, leading to overcapacity in Crossgates, and we don't have information on Newbridge and Rhayader. So in actual fact, we have a wider catchment review, and I remember Councillor Sandra last session praising the results of the catchment review with the words pretty much, not everyone was happy, but everyone felt they'd been part of the same thing. Surely this proposal should be involved in that catchment review and not be done standalone, because you're taking capacity out that you may actually need. Emma, your hand's been up for about half of that, and Marianne as well. And I think you've both been expecting this question at some point. So all yours.
Actually, on a wider strategic level, Councillor Peake, we've been having a look at the demography across Powys, but we've been looking at it for a number of reasons, and one was around workforce. I know a little bit more around the wider demography than purely working on transforming education, and we are based on the information that is available to us and the population projections. Whilst we're seeing a slight increase, in parts, looking at the different age bands, we are still predicting reductions of decreases in the population. Now we've got surplus capacity within the area currently in respect of this proposal and the wider Llandrindod, and even if you looked at built, etc. I think pretty much in every catchment, based on the current infrastructure. What we don't know, of course, we have to move forward, and we have to progress things, because there's never an end to data, as you all know, Councillor Peake. What we don't know is obviously what will happen as a result of the pandemic. And so, to be completely honest with you, we know we can see locally what's happening in terms of house prices and how quickly houses are being purchased. But what we don't know, and what we haven't had through in our data yet, is how much of that is the inward migration of maybe new families, etc. That said, I don't think we can wait to see how that transpires in years to come through various census, etc. And we have to act on the basis of the data that we have available to us currently, whilst also you can apply some assumptions. So overall, in terms of demography and in terms of school age, even with the housing bills that we're seeing, our current figures, because we check these annually, still stand that the school population is reducing. I think something like 5 years ago, it was around 20,000 across the county. It's already down to 16 and a half, and will go down to 15 and a half, unless, as I said, unless we receive updated data in years to come with a significant increase of inward migration. So I think we have to go with what we've got now, and at the moment there is capacity in the areas that you refer to. Thanks, Councillor Pete.
Thank you for that, Emma. And I would almost certainly be completely agreeing with you if the wider review of Callum Cymru were at the end of the window that's been noted. But you've got a proposal that's coming forward and research that is coming, well, in many ways it's already started. And I question very severely, you have a wider catchment review now in place that was announced during the time that this consultation was going out. And in that respect, and I've just been distracted by the fact that you need to get the door to contain your dog. That's a random one that's completely blown my line of thought. You've got a wider catchment review that is taking place in parallel with this, and therefore I am really struggling to see how we can say, from the rural schools policy perspective, that all avenues have been explored to retain this school being open when the entire catchment is being reviewed, and that review may throw up options that require this school to continue, and we don't know that. So it is really a fundamental question that if this were not a rural school, I would not have a problem, but because of the legislation there, I'm not sure with this wider process going on how we can say that the terms of the rural schools policy have been met.
Can I
come back by all means?
So we've most of our schools in Paris would be determined as rural schools. You referred and used the term wider catchment review. When we had the discussions previously with Cabinet, we were talking about the proposals around Callum Cymru, and last week indeed we also touched upon the West, didn't we, and what that would mean and the complexities in the mid of the county. We did touch upon the north and the south as well, but yeah, last week we had some discussion around that. And we do need to understand and work through the complexities of the Callum Cymru. And as part of that, we said that all schools and any stakeholders can be and will be engaged and can participate in respect of the consultation around that, because there's such significant complexities. By taking the time to do the engagement, and it's probably one of the most challenging ones that I've come across in my career, that the engagement is going to be essential in respect of understand or working with as well in respect of those the primary provision in that area. I'm conscious I've used the term critical path, and I've done that a few times, and please forgive me because that's probably the programme management terminology coming out as a practitioner, but it's really important to understand those we have still got a significant number of schools in the areas with surplus capacity, and we are not seeing equity, which were the points that I made before. So whilst I appreciate the points that you're making and this proposal, we have to progress with proposals to move forward. Otherwise, we're not going to see equitable provision for children across the county, even in Radnorshire, if you want to refer to it as that. You know, there's differences within that area alone, let alone when you bring into account the sheer size of Powys, and that's not fair, and that's not fair on other children. And what we need to do is make sure that we've got that equitable provision. I'll leave it there, Chair. I won't rehearse. I know we've covered the other areas before. Sorry.
Okay, Marianne, if you'd like to come in, and then I'll respond and then move on.
I think we need to make it very clear here about what exactly is going on with the Ysgol Calon Cymru plans, etc. So we have a plan, a vision for Ysgol Calon Cymru, and we started looking at Ysgol Calon Cymru on its own because that's where the need was, the immediate need, you know, the operational model, etc. Welsh medium education, again, needs to be looked at. So that was our starting point. We're launching into an informal engagement very soon around that. Can I just make it very clear that we're not running an area review in Llandrindod and Builth catchment in parallel with this current proposal. It will happen, but we will have to come to some kind of conclusion on the future of Ysgol Calon Cymru and the Welsh mediums all age that we've got in our aspirations before we even look at the wider review of schools in the area. So what I'm saying is it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time to get through the complexities of our aspirations for secondary, in particular in the area, before we start looking at primary. And as Emma said, it's about, you know, we could wait. We could put everything on the back burner and wait until, you know, we know exactly where we're headed and we know the funding is there, etc. It can take years. So we do need to address the issue of inequity and improving learner experience and entitlement as soon as we can. And now we can't afford to wait, is what I'm saying. But I just wanted to make it very clear, there's not another review going on in parallel with this one.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, Marianne, but I'm looking at the response from the council to item 14.1.1.8, which says the pupil projections in the consultation document do not include any estimates from housing developments in Llandrindod, Wales. Council is aware of current and planned housing developments in the area. It's not anticipated that these will lead to a significant increase in pupil numbers in Amberhangor Dyson. I can agree with that because there's not many planned to be built in the village. But the next statement says the council monitors schools' capacities on an annual basis. The next phase of the Ysgol Calon Cymru transformation will consider the overall impact of pupil numbers and school places. So you've actually said in the consultation that the next phase is looking at the wider catchment. You've said in this that you've not taken into account development, therefore you haven't taken into account the potential of decanting of pupils out of Llandrindod, Wales, where there is one school over capacity and one school that is at or near capacity. Therefore, isn't there a risk that you are going to close a school next week with a view to the fact that there is surplus capacity primarily at Crossgates, which will then be filled up with pupils decanting out because of the demands elsewhere, and you will go into the transformation programme suddenly needing to find additional places, only to find you've closed a school that you could be decanting, trickling out into. That's my concern, because of the amount of development and some of the economic development potential, particularly in respect of the the potential for attracting a large commercial enterprise in the town area that I think you and I both know what I'm referring to, but there are confidentiality issues, so I can't say any more in an open forum. And you're mute if you're responding, Marianne.
I was just saying, I understand your concerns there. I think factually, though, that statement in 14.1.1.8 still stands. We will be considering the overall impact of pupil numbers as part of the overall area review once we get to that stage. I take your comments and I can see the argument, but we believe that doing this now is the right thing, and we can then look at the impact of pupil numbers more widely once we get to the next phase of the
okay.
I'm
aware we've only got 15 minutes left before you need to leave, so I'm going to move on to Councillor Amanda, and let's look at school surpluses and transport, and then we've got the remaining question outstanding of the questions around the curriculum and delivery in small schools. Councillor Amanda.
Yeah, I've put my question on surplus budget up in the chat because I don't want to take up too much time by trying to articulate it, because I'm usually better just typing things out. But it's basically, why is there a surplus? Does Powers ever claw it back? And are there any themes of surpluses? So I just wondered if you could answer that. My questions on transport are that I know that a lot of consultee comments flagged this as being an issue. They expected that if you close a school, then there would be increased transport costs, and the council's position is that there won't be, or that those increased transport costs will be really negligible. But what I did notice when I was looking through your SWOT analysis of options 10, 11, 12, I think, where you consider whether or not if you closed this school and another school and then opened a school on one site, where you've identified additional transport costs as being a weakness of those options. So my query is why can you foresee additional transport costs for those options, but not for this option? I also just want to ask and plead really that there is flexibility with how we look at our free home to school transport policy in the future, should the decision be made to close this school, because parents and children are going to be making decisions not necessarily based on what is their closest school, but where their peers are going to and what is most suitable for their needs as a family. And it may be, and also capacity issues as well. So for example, you might find all the pupils going to Crossgates, but that isn't their nearest school. So therefore, under Powers' free home to school transport policy, they wouldn't necessarily be entitled to free home to school transport. But, if they're making that decision because this school's closing, then I think there should be flexibility there in terms of how we apply that policy and the different circumstances and scenarios that we look into. Especially where we don't want to be in a case where, we're going to have to parents are going to have to split up siblings in the future because one sibling might get free transport and the other one won't. I don't want parents' options and choices to be restricted based on their finances as to whether or not they can afford transport because this school is potentially going to close. So those are my questions. Sorry, it's a bit of a whistle-stop ramble because I'm conscious of time.
For the benefits of those watching online, the question that Amanda put in the chat was around surpluses and clawback, and should surplus budgets be fed into the formula when we're looking at the cost per pupil, and just general questions around why we aren't seeing clawback on budgets.
And my rationale for asking that question is because we are, as a council, you're arguing that we need equitable funding per pupil, and the average funding per pupil at this school is high. However, this school is reported to have a surplus budget of I think it's around 40k. So therefore, what's happening with that? Is that a regular thing? Will it get clawed back? And if it's a regular thing and there's a theme there, then doesn't the way that we fund the schools need to be adapted?
Emma.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Amanda, I don't believe that we do claw back surpluses, but I need to check that out with finance colleagues. But to my knowledge, we don't. Like, see Mary shaking her head there, so we've not done so. In respect of the formula, yes, you're right. When the funding formula was changed, it was a few years back now. The results of that did see the smaller schools fare very well in respect of the funding. And over the past few years, there have been some minor adjustments in terms of funding formula, but it is subject now to further review because of our understanding and picking up the points that you've raised. That won't be covered off in this particular paper because it will have to be a paper in its own right for consideration in due course. I don't know whether Marianne or Irene would have a closer understanding as to why there's a specific surplus within this particular school.
Hi, yeah, I think with this particular school, we fund the formula drives the funding for each primary school, and it allows funding for their own head teacher, and obviously it's as we discussed previously, it's a shared headship in this case, so they do then can save some money and result in a surplus then as a result of that. We haven't ever clawed back any surplus. The authority, once the funding's been delegated, there has to be a number of different steps that we have to go through to be able to claw anything back, and it has to be quite a substantial surplus for that to happen as well. And as Emma said, we are having another look at the formula, and we have seen, I mean, the current formula was introduced to provide stability, particularly for our smaller schools, and it's done that, and now we're ready to move on from there, really.
Thanks for that. I'm aware we've got just over 5 minutes to go, and I want to focus on this question of small schools and the national curriculum. The new curriculum encourages ability-based learning rather than age-based learning, and stretching of pupils. So isn't actually the position that we have in Llanfihangel Rhydaithen better for that delivery, because a pupil can be taught with colleagues who are more in tune with their ability rather than their age, particularly those at the extreme, the more able and talented, and those with additional challenges. You could have a 7-year-old with the learning ability of an 8-9-year-old working with them, and a 9-year-old with particular challenges working with pupils of their ability at a younger age. So actually, contrary to what has been suggested, these large mixed classes actually fit the delivery of the new curriculum better than schools where they've got classes with just a single age in them. How would you respond? Yeah,
I'm happy to respond to you. Yeah, certainly, and happy to respond. The scenario you give there is actually still grouping children into ability ranges. Now, if you have 4 year groups inside your class and you are looking at ability ranges there, you actually have a much wider range of abilities and ages inside your classroom than you would in a 1 or single year group class there. So that actually puts additional burden class teacher. And it comes back to a point that Margaret made earlier on about standards. The standards that pupils achieve is not as a result of the number of pupils that are actually in the classroom. It's about effective teaching. That is the most important lever that a school has on the outcomes for their pupils. So you want high quality teachers. High quality learning will take place because the teacher is able to differentiate and challenge all those pupils. In a smaller school with 4-year groups, that is much harder to do. Not that it can't be done, it is done, and it is done successfully in schools in Powys. But we have to recognize the challenge that is taking place there. We're now designing a new curriculum, 6 areas of learning with 4 differentiated levels there, and that progress in learning is so important. And we are putting that pressure and additional workload on very small numbers of people inside our smallest schools. 2-teacher schools where they are trying to work together, they are now having that additional pressure put on them. So I can understand the question, but we are putting that pressure that they still have to ensure that all pupils inside their class are challenged, all ability levels are challenged, and across 6 areas of learning within the new curriculum.
Okay, Claire, if you want to come in, let's keep questions very sharp and to the point. We've got very little time now.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very quick. And it's really a point I want to make now. In Llanbiangor, they are already delivering that curriculum. The new curriculum is being delivered very effectively. It was noted by Estin that the curriculum in broad and balanced, imaginative and developed. And from what I understand, it is working well for the pupils and they are actually thriving on it. So it is actually already happening.
Just to respond to that, all schools are moving towards the new curriculum. We couldn't actually say that all schools are actually implementing it because not all areas of the curriculum have actually been released yet, such as the assessments, areas of that. So yeah, I'm happy to accept that all schools are moving and progressing towards it. I just can't say that a school is delivering the whole curriculum because I don't think we have the whole curriculum yet ready to take that forward.
I think there needs to be a wider point rather than the particular school, because this is a
and that's what I was trying to
issue.
make there. Is all schools can come and say, yes, we're delivering the curriculum. No, we're moving towards the curriculum. We haven't got the whole curriculum yet. We don't know what assessment will look like in terms of the new curriculum, which is why we're on the process of working towards this by September 2022. But even as a local authority, we couldn't say we're ready for the new curriculum. We don't know what the whole of the new curriculum will look like. They may well be saying they are implementing some areas of learning, which is good. This is what we would be expecting all schools to be delivering on. But no school yet can say we are delivering the new curriculum.
Thanks for that, Eric. I will bring Daleth in, but I'm going to give my final question on this, which we just got time for, is that you've touched on this, the 6 areas, the challenge that faces to teachers. That appears to be contradicted what the Education Minister is saying. How do you balance that view that coming from civil servants through him, that the new curriculum has been developed with all Welsh schools in mind, with the professional opinion of officers here, that the challenge is too big for schools where there are... Sorry, wrong word.
No, it's not too big. No, I'm sorry, you don't...
No, sorry, my mistake. I'm trying to find the words. That the challenge is very challenging.
Yeah, and that's what we are making everyone aware of the challenges that are there. It's challenging for all schools. But what we're trying to say is when you're in a school of two staff, and it's the teachers that are actually the ones that should be developing the curriculum. So they're responsible for that planning and delivery. All that challenge is resting on their shoulders. Now, that is something we have to make everyone aware of. It's not that it can't be done. It can be done, but it is a greater challenge for them than if you are in another school where you have others that are also leading on other areas of learning. And then you can share that expertise, share that collaboration, which is an important part of the new curriculum. Collaboration across schools as well can be done. It is more difficult, is what we're saying, and a challenge. It's not that it can't be done. because we have got some fantastic teachers across Powys and they are making sure it is done. But we have to just make everyone aware this is a huge challenge, and the work that the additional work that's been put on those teachers will have a burden on them. So that's what I want to just make you aware.
Emma, I know you were keen to go a minute ago. Would you like to have the final comment on this?
If I may, Chair, thank you very much. I think just to reiterate, we do concur with the Minister. We're not at odds with the Minister, and I think you've just heard that through ARIG's response there. But I think we need to be clear that the Minister responded to a question recently about him seeing no reason why rural schools should not be able to deliver the curriculum, and we've not refuted that. We agree rural schools can deliver the curriculum, and as Irene said, but the challenge is in the very small schools delivering the curriculum, and there's a difference there. So we're not saying it's impossible, but it's challenging. So I just wanted to make that very clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Emma. I'm aware that you need to go to other meetings now, and I think we are quite unusually going to have a discussion within the committee to look at what recommendations we're taking forward, because I'm mindful that I didn't do take my normal approach of drawing out conclusions during the meeting, because I'm aware of your time and didn't want to expend time on that, so that we could get as full a picture from you as possible. So I will thank officers from that, and I wish you luck in the next meeting that you're going to, and I think you've just got enough time to put the kettle on.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
And we look forward to receiving your report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all colleagues for that. I mean, slightly uncharted territory here in terms of moving forward, because we do need to bring some recommendations through to Cabinet off the back of what we've heard today. We had a number of clear concerns that particularly Councillor Jake, Councillor Amanda, myself and lay member Margaret have raised, and I just want to get a feel from the committee as what recommendations we should be taking forward before I draw things to a close, because I'm not going to say anything. Does anyone want to have any comments at this point?
Yes, please, Pete. I think, sorry, it's Councillor Amanda. I think the point that Margaret made about seeing evidence to do with mixed age classes within these reports should be a recommendation, because we will all, as you know, some of us parents, some of us have worked in educational environments, have seen different things ourselves to influence our own views on whether or not big mixed age classes are workable or not in terms of progress, and I think we'd probably have a range of opinions on that from our within this group, and so I think Margaret's point on having evidence, you know, there must be educational evidence that the council has got and would refer to as to why having less of a year group range in a class is more deliverable in terms of differentiation and meeting children's needs. So I think that should be a recommendation. And then the other, I didn't actually get any answers because of time to my school transport questions. And I don't know what the recommendation should be, because I don't know as a committee we can, you know, you might not agree with my point about ensuring that the school home to school transport policy is flexible. Should they close the school in order to ensure that parents and pupils' choices are not restricted by their own financial means because of the homes to school transport policy?
I think, and I'm not going to put Councillor Allard on the spot here, even though he is with us. I think there are a number of questions coming up about the school transport policy as a result of transformation that are going to need to be looked at, and I suspect, though I'm not certain, we have got another review coming up that will look at those. And I'm not going to put Aled on the spot, but he's offering to be put on the spot, so all yours.
Yeah, sorry, Aled, and I don't want to put you on the spot either, but I feel that in light of this transformation, we should be relooking at the school transport policy.
Yes, thank you. When we reviewed the transport policy last time, we gave a commitment that we would do so, review it again as we progressed along the school transformation. They have to go hand in hand. It is the school's transformation policy that dictates how and the school's admissions policies that dictate how we deal with the transport. So there has been assurance given that we would look at those that issue again, and we are currently doing some work on that, but it's not at the stage. It hasn't progressed that far yet, but clearly there's some work happening at the moment.
And I'd hope though that it would, sorry Pete, but I personally hope that it's going to be timely, because the timeframes we're looking at here is over the next year. So for mitigating this, yeah.
It does. The legislation around this does cause a little bit of difficulty because you have to go to consultation and give clear time before the next school year starts. So it is a bit of a slow process through consultation and implementation.
I think that's helpful, Aled. I think that the issues that we would highlight that have come out of this and other transformation is the issues that are raised as a result of change of language category at a school, and also here where you've got pupils being moved from one school to another, where there is parental choice involved, and the challenges that presents, because the questions that we didn't explore today were around the fact that there are quite a significant number of pupils at this school that were from a different catchment where the parents had clearly exercised a choice. So we didn't explore that. So there are then questions, if they've chosen not to use a school once, being given the choice again, will they choose not to use that again? So there are issues. They're not for today, but they are to perhaps take away and look at. Claire, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Jay. I've got a couple of points, really. First of all, I think it's really sad in the report that we've received that not once has Powys mentioned the strength, or have they acknowledged how hard the teachers work within the school, which I think is quite sad. In addition, Eirig mentioned 2 teachers. And if we look at Llanelwydd and Dolly working together, there are 7 teachers, 5 in Llanelwydd, 2 in Dolly. Each of those teachers has a responsibility for an area of the new curriculum. So we've got to kind of look at how they're working together now, not just the 2 teachers in Dolly. So there is that obviously collaborative working. The second point that was raised to me, and it was in relation to the report, was we all know how long it is and how long it's taken us to read through it and extract information. What governors and parents would like to see from Powys, as I understand, is a clear, precise document pointing out blow by blow the reasons that Powys think that this school should be closed. So that was just one of the areas that's been raised with me. But I think we do need to acknowledge the staff and the teachers across the 2 boards, the 2 schools, and how hard they work and how well they work with their students and pupils.
I think we have to be mindful that we are looking at this from a scrutiny perspective, and that relates to Powys policy and national policy.
Yeah, I can understand.
I understand and I've read through all of the documents. I don't know how I managed it, but twice, and it's quite clear that there is very strong community support for the school, and there's very strong support for the way the school is run.
And understandably.
But what we today have to look at is the policy side of things.
Yeah, I can understand that. I find it very hard to digest that Cabinet make the final decision on this matter as well. I must admit, really do.
Margaret, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it's really on this. It's the whatever statements are made, and Jake made reference to this in the document. It's the lack of evidence that I feel is. It was in the other school we looked at. I really feel that statements are made without sufficient supporting evidence.
It's a key point. Let's have a think. We started off talking about Llanelwydd, and we touched on that a bit now. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about the WESP and the Welsh language elements of that. The officers in their report touched on this and rejected that proposal. We've had quite a bit of discussion again today. Our members of the committee actually convinced that there is enough evidence being put forward to merit us saying that that option should be excluded at this point, or is there a need for additional work on that? Do you think that has properly been researched and excluded? Because at the end of the day, when we're looking at the small rural schools policy, the guidance is retaining open if there is another option available. And I'm not going to say anything from my perspective. I asked the questions. I'd welcome committee's observations on the responses.
Pete, sorry, I've put my camera on. I should have probably put my hand up and come in. Is it all right to speak?
Yes, go ahead. I quite often take a camera appearing when everyone's faces are there as an indication that people want to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably gather from what I was saying earlier, and I suspect officers clearly would disagree with what I'm saying here, but I wasn't convinced. I think the bar is set high, and I do just think the council leaves itself vulnerable, but they will have taken officer opinion, possibly legal opinion, on whether they have reached the criteria. But, you know, I am sceptical about it. I do feel that in those areas that I described earlier, that we could have done some more work. I think that there are some unanswered questions, and I feel that there were areas where we were simply saying, this is the response, this is our answer, it is right, and it is in the interests of children. We've heard it a number of times today, the same answer coming forward, and I just feel others will have much more experience than I in these matters, but I sense that just leaves us vulnerable on that question. And I certainly, as a member of this scrutiny panel, if it was for me to be recommending or otherwise to Cabinet regarding its decision next week, I would be very circumspect, and I think I would shy away from doing so at this point in time.
I know there's a lot of you that have left the questioning to others today. Is there anyone I've not heard from earlier would like to make some observations on Jake and my point? Because I'm acutely nervous that we're both of the same political group, and scrutiny is apolitical. So I'd like very much like to hear from other people on the committee so that I can formulate a position for all of us that I can take forward next week. Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't unmute then. Thank you. Yes, I've gone through the document and picked up quite a lot of information, but it's things that I am able to relate to, having gone through the process personally in the area that I represent. People do feel very, very responsible and very much in kin with their local schools, especially if it's a local village school that they've grown up in, and perhaps not only their children, but they themselves, their parents, their grandparents, etc., have gone to that school. So there's a lot of historical reasons to maintain a school in a village. And I can relate to some of that. I mean, I've ate it, breathed it, sort of thing. Coming to the actual fact of the school and the situation that we've got, we have in Powys, as we've always said, because of the size of Powys and the rurality of Powys, these have been the problems that have been very difficult for anybody, no matter where they're living, to make. And it's even more difficult if a person is living in that area, so it's directly affecting them themselves. And a question was asked, why is it that the Cabinet should decide whether a school should be closed or not? And why shouldn't it be, I'm assuming then it would be put to full council. I remember a situation where 3 schools, very much identical in the numbers of children, criteria, grades, buildings, everything, were very, very similar. I went up as a non-member of the council, listened into the meeting, and nobody left the chamber, so all the same members were in the chamber. And the first and second schools went through that they should close. The third school, 2 members changed their minds because it directly affected them, and that school was left open. And I think that's why we've got a cleaner situation here now, with the Cabinet making the decision. And I think this process is the right one. Going through scrutiny, where everybody in our committee are from different political backgrounds. We've got individuals from, we've got representatives from the church and lay members, etc. And I think that's right and proper. So I think we're trying to do this as cleanly and as equitable as possible. Coming back to the finance of a child, my personal feeling is that every child, no matter which school they are in, should have the same amount of money on that child's head. That doesn't work out because of the geography of Powys. And I know that in Ystrad, many, 12 schools were closed, irrespective of the size or the shape or anything of the schools. And we've got now 4 big ones. Those 4 big schools were promised that the amount of money would be put back in from the closure of the schools, etc., and that the schools would be financially sound for a number of years. It didn't happen because, as we know, the elections come up, people change, views change, and without anything written down tightly, everything can go up in the air, and that happens. So having policies are the guide that we need to adhere to and keep close to heart. Equity is very, very important. Trying to have the same amount of money for each child, or as near as possible, is the way forward, because I don't think it's right that you have huge different disparities with a school because of its geography and how much money is spent in that school. And let us not forget, each school requires a head teacher, deputy head teacher, or perhaps at least 2 individuals, irrespective of how many. If there's 2 children in the class, they still have to have 2 members of staff. You have to have a cleaner, you have to have the cooks, you have to pay all the utility bills, there's the money that comes in and out of the school as far as council tax is concerned. So that, there are huge bills attached to the schools, irrespective of the sizes. And that's the imponderable problem that we have in Powys, is trying to get equity. I take on board parents' feelings and emotions and the staff that are involved, but I do know, having gone through the process in this area, there is light at the end of the tunnel. The children that are in the bigger schools, yes, it's a fight, it's always a fight. We are, and I'm saying this, in one of the schools that I represent, we're having the smallest amount of money per head per child. It doesn't even come up to the average. We're well underneath that, and it is a fight. And we continue to fight, and that's what it is. And we will continue to fight until all schools become more equitable, because there's only the same amount of money in the pot, and you can't take. I don't think it's fair that one school, because of its size, has 7,000 plus per child, when you have another school fighting because it's a big school and they have 3,000 plus for a child. There is no equity. And I think we have to bear things like that in mind when we're looking at this school. And having a large school does improve children's education, because they do learn off each other. And if they are in classes where they are all of same age, then they have a much better background, but much better knowledge and experience. Having a large, about 30 children with different ages in the classroom is very, very difficult, very, very demanding on the teacher. And, I'm speaking from my experience, and I think that this is the right way forward. And I think it should be our decision here and now to send to the Cabinet and help and support them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Sandra. Margaret, you want to come in?
Just on evidence, thinking about it, Jake has raised and I raised the one issue, but it's in the document, and I think they have at every stage if there's possible to give evidence that gives a clear picture, it's helpful. And I don't find that necessarily in the document. So the numbers of children who in the catchment area who travel outside of the catchment area to their school. Now, we had that on the last one we had that after the event. It wasn't available then. But I think I found that a really useful piece of information at the time when we received it afterwards. But that, with a comparator with the other schools that the children could go to, in the numbers from those schools that actually travel outside of that school's catchment to go to a different school. Now, I would find that quite a useful piece of data to look at.
Yeah,
Margaret, I don't need anybody to come to a conclusion about it. I just would like to see, and it would help us understand the area, the whole issue.
Yeah, I did raise that with officers, and they were hoping to try to get that to us, but haven't been able to.
No, but that sort of thing I'm talking about, I think should be in the document.
Claire.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to make one quick point, really. As I've taught in small schools where we've had mixed year groups in one classroom. I've taught in larger schools where we've had 30 children in a classroom. My daughter was in a small school before it was shut down. And I must completely disagree with Councillor Sandra when she said that she thinks that children get a better education in a larger classroom, because I've seen it firsthand. That is just simply not true. It's down to the quality of the teachers and the work that they put in and how the children and the pupils respond to that. So I just wanted to make that point. Thanks, Chair.
Fair enough. Before I make a comment, Edwin, Gwynfor, I've not heard from either of you, and for that matter, Sarah. Are there any comments that you have before I try and draw something together? Edwin.
Thank you, Chair. Between yourself and Councillor Berryman to start off, you've done such a fantastic, comprehensive summing up of it and putting the points forward. You left very little, really, to be fair, for any of us to answer, especially me. I felt that at one point I'm way out of my depth here, but I appreciate what the both of you have done. And of course, Councillor Amanda's come in after and topped up, as it were. The bottom line is I've got nothing to add, to be honest with you. There is a situation where our hearts are torn between closing a small local village school. It's happened in my area. I have 3 sons. 2 are educated in the small school where there was only 28, maybe 30. I've got to say they done exceptionally well. They've achieved the top of their professions. The only thing that the both of them comments they made when they went to a larger school, to the local Brecon High, was that how they missed out on sports facilities, etc., like that. But that's when we reflect on it, it hasn't done them no harm. it's a very difficult one, and I'm walking the line at the moment. I'm not sure which way to go. So thank you, Pete. It's been very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. And I don't want to pull us to a vote in any formally way. I may have to. But I think that the key thing that we need to look at, we need to be quite firm on this and put the emotional side to one side. When we took on this position in the process, in lieu of the full council involvement, we were very much taking the position that we were looking at what officers had come back with to see whether it meets the legal requirements, and particularly with the small rural schools, whether we are confident that officers have met the school code in respect of that environment. And that's what I'm going to have to draw us towards in a minute. But I would like to hear from Gwynfor and Sarah, even if it is just to say that they've got nothing to add. So could I ask one of you to come in, please? Sarah.
Hi, Pete. Sorry, no, I did just put a comment about officers adequately answering the points that we raised, but mine was really regarding last week and the Kilchmaithrin and the heavy reliance in the west of that. But no, nothing to add to today's other than whatever decisions and things that we say now will also affect other primary schools that we know are also coming to scrutiny later on.
I would add to that. I'm in agreement with what has been said. I find it very difficult not knowing the schools. I know we're examining policy. It's really, really difficult to, with no knowledge of the schools whatsoever, to add too much comment to it, really. But yeah, I'm in agreement with the conclusions.
Okay, I'm going to draw us to a conclusion with my own thoughts. My thoughts are that the responses that we've received in most of the areas are just about satisfactory, but I am very worried about the Welsh language aspects. We had the West Go Past Cabinet yesterday. It does recognise the East Radnorshire area through the naming of Prestine as an area that we need to develop and are looking to have a Welsh primary. In those discussions, it was highlighted that Crickhowell and Haytalgarth were going to be a real challenge to move forward because there was no Kilchmaithrin. Obviously, that is in draft form, so we have to, in a very planning process, be mindful rather than governed by it. But we have a location here where there is a Kilch that may or may not survive if the school it feeds into closes. And I am personally still unconvinced that the option of creating a bilingual school on this site, moving it along the continuum, however challenging it might be, is no more or less challenging than establishing that one at Prestine or at Knighton or at Radnor Valley. And given its geographic locality, it could well pull pupils in from the current area that go to Trevonen and potentially open up additional space at Trevonen. I'm not convinced that that has been explored sufficiently at this stage to warrant stating that under the Rural Schools Code that every option of retaining the school being open has actually been met. And I'm really, really struggling with this one because of the importance of the Welsh language targets and the messages coming back within the consultation, which suggests that there might be an openness within the community to embracing this and moving it forward, and making a success of it. And it's really, really difficult for me, because I think on all the other points of concern that I raised, officers have come back and put forward a justification as to why that is the right move. And it's on balance on the Llanelwydd issue. It's only just on balance on that one, but I'm not convinced on the Welsh language one. But I am with the committee as a whole and looking for a form of wording that we are taking back to Cabinet, because this is actually quite a fundamental challenge in this area. So please now concur or disagree with me around what I'm saying now. I'm very much looking for some steer from everyone. Edwin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the localities make a lot of difference to where the Welsh is going to expand or survive, as it were. And a lot of the problem is down to finding the teachers that can teach through the medium of Welsh. And you would, to quote an area now like the Hay Talgath area, it is an area where, to put only one way I can put it, it is very English. It is on the border, as it were. And speaking to many there, they will say they will never learn the language. And then you move back to the area where I'm from, which we are finding great difficulty, especially in the Ysgol Weithrin, where there aren't the teachers there to teach children through the medium of Welsh or to talk to them in their native tongue. But as you go, I feel more towards the west or the south, it tends to come more natural. So I feel we've got a hell of a hill to climb to get the Welsh language back onto a curriculum where people will take it in their stride and learn the language and use the language. Because to learn the language and to become proficient in it, one has to speak it every day. And that's where the hardest part is. There's, just to quote a very good friend of mine, they have children in North Wales by St. Asaph, where they are taught through the medium of Welsh. And if they are speaking or seen to be speaking English in the playground during playtime, they are reprimanded, which reminds me of the old Welsh knot, as it were, just put the other way around. But as I said, my friend up there, he is very, very English, but now he and his children and his grandchildren are very proficient in Welsh. And at the end of the day, it is a language we all love, and we mustn't see it go out. What's the answer, Chair? I don't know, but I think we all have to make that extra bit of push and support all those, and try and support the teachers to come and teach the language. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Amanda.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wondered whether, Pete, if you're looking for wording on how to sort of formulate your recommendation as from the committee on this point, because obviously the decision maker is Cabinet, and whether you could highlight that this has been discussed and that our recommendation is that a fuller evidenced explanation is given to Cabinet with their papers on the rationale as to why this option on the point on the Welsh language point that you're making hasn't been taken forward, and whether that could be our recommendation, that the Cabinet's given a more in-depth rationale than what we've been given.
Thanks for that, Amanda. I'm thinking while I'm listening. Councillor Jake.
Hi, Pete. I think what I was saying earlier is that I think this was a missed opportunity for us to more fully consider whether Dalai could be federated with, and I think I called it a larger sister school in what I said earlier, and converted over time. Now, I made no judgment as to which school that might be. I merely pointed to the gap which existed in East Radnorshire. I have to be very careful here because I'm a governor of Tuscol Trevonham, but you know, that's an existing Welsh stream school, and you know, I don't feel that we've explored all of those opportunities because I don't think we looked at the problem from this way in. Now, if we were now to focus on this as an opportunity to see this as a way to draw pupils, and I think Edwin's absolutely right, Councillor Edwin's absolutely right. On the border, Prestine, Knighton, Hay, etc., we have some real difficulty getting a further embedding of the Welsh language. I think perhaps this much further in from that, linked to other schools in a federated way with Welsh at the core of that, I just think there's more to explore, and I would certainly wish to recommend that Cabinet seeks further information on exploring those opportunities. I don't want to narrow that down for Cabinet or for officers, but I just think there's something there. I think we might kick ourselves if we made the decision now and hadn't explored that, because I wasn't convinced earlier that we'd got to the bottom of that particular problem. I don't think they're as separate as perhaps we were led to believe. Sorry, Pete, I still haven't given you the wording. I think we can work around exploring that opportunity more. You know, I think that's where it needs to be, because the decision is for Cabinet. We're merely highlighting our concerns at this stage that we haven't tied this off yet.
Jake, are you almost suggesting that we're recommending perhaps a delay in the decision to allow officers to come back with a much more detailed analysis of both the Federation and the Welsh language proposals, because as a scrutiny committee, we've not been convinced by the papers in front of us that they are sufficient to say that their exclusion meets the terms of the rural schools policy.
I think that's absolutely right, Pete. And I'm not, you know, I'm not doing this because I've been got at by, you know, teachers or governors at the school. This is just about the principles involved here. I'm wishing to safeguard the position for Powys. I don't want to see a legal action successful against Powys. I just think there's room for doubt in there. And we've heard evidence, and I think some of that evidence has been reinforced today around some of the other issues. We've gone from a 500-page document, 300 pages of consultation responses, etc. I think the officers have done very well to answer a whole range of points for us and narrow it down. And these are the couple of areas that I feel I would still need to be convinced around that there wasn't an opportunity left for us to explore. So I wouldn't want Cabinet to explore this whole lot. I would like them to close that funnel down here to say, yes, we've considered these other things. I'm happy for scrutiny to say we've considered these and they've been addressed reasonably, but I want now this to be looked at in more detail before it is concluded upon. I think that would be better for the school and all concerned, and for Cabinet. I'm not wanting to throw anybody a lifeline here and provide false hope. This isn't about political gamesmanship or anything. This is about getting the right solution. And if there is an opportunity, let's explore it. It may well be in the dialogue with the school. The school says, you know what, we'd rather want to close the doors than do this. But I just want those conversations to have been had so that we know that they have been justly and properly explored. That's just, I've got my cards on the table.
I'm leaning towards that position as well. Councillor Amanda, you've suggested something that's not dissimilar to that. I've seen Margaret nodding extensively. Are people comfortable? Come in, Amanda.
Yeah, so I mean, my suggestion isn't quite as far as Jake's, because I expect that that rationale has already been done and that we haven't fully heard it or seen it within the papers. But I think that that rationale, if there, should be given to Cabinet, and that should be our recommendation.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts around that? I'm very much narrowing our recommendation down to something working around those two areas. Claire.
Can I just like to back what Councillor Jake said, and I agree with him. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other observations? Okay. I'm going to suggest that our recommendation going to Cabinet is that we have been completely convinced that the arguments are justified on all of the grounds other than federation and Welsh language. We would wish Cabinet to have much more detailed information around the potential in respect of moving the school from an English language school to one that is either dual language or dual language, moving proactively along the route to a Welsh school. And we would look to see Cabinet having a lot more information in front of them before they take a decision. And if officers believe that that means they need to defer the meeting in order to gather that information together, I would encourage officers to examine that possibility with Cabinet. But at this stage, as a committee, we can neither approve, we can neither say that the criteria of the rural schools policy have been met or they have been failed. We think it is on too much of a knife edge to actually categorically say one way or the other. There is still doubt in our minds. Is that a position that everyone is happy to sit comfortably with for us to take forward? I'm seeing nods from 3 or 4 people, and I'm seeing some dissent. So I'm quite happy to go back with that as being a majority view, but not a unanimous view from the committee. And I think that in and of itself just shows how balanced this is, and what a difficult decision the Cabinet have in respect of this. Does anyone have any comments? And with that caveat that it's going forward as a majority rather than unanimous view, are people comfortable with that as our response, final response to Cabinet?
I think that's fair, Pete.
I think this has been one of the most difficult bits of scrutiny we've had to do because of the legal environment, the legal position in which we're working. And I would very much thank all of you for your contributions today, and in their absence, thank officers for their contribution, because I would have to commend them in absentia for having enough knowledge of the papers that they have brought forward to provide us with the information that enables us to reach this position that we have now. So on that basis, I will say thank you. I'll draw this item to a close and ask Wynne to take us on to the forward work programme, and if there are any changes or updates since we were last together last week.
There's nothing on the agenda, Chair. I didn't do that because we'd already covered it last week.
That's fine. I just wanted to check there weren't any updates. In which case, I would like to thank everyone for their contribution today. When after we've gone offline and everyone else has left, if you want to stay on with me to discuss the report, and I've got the time available to do so.
Hey, do you want to do reflection as well, Chair? Because you've got that item on there for a couple of minutes if you want to, but I'll take us offline first.
Yeah, if we could go offline.